Good afternoon and welcome to this special edition of the Halftime Talk, a weekly feature interview where we take a deep dive into a big story of the week. And there's nothing bigger than this week and this month and this quarter and this year. Let's put them all in the box as the update and the insights for the implications of the US war on Iran. And we're delighted to be joined at this critical moment by Anas Alhajji, the managing partner of Energy Outlook Advisors, joining us from Texas. Anas, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Sean.
Anas, let's kick off with the kind of news of the day here, as we're going to be obviously publishing ahead of tonight the big news that Trump again has set a very big deadline for the Iran to comply with opening the Straits of Hormuz. Otherwise, the U.S. military will destroy the civilian energy and water infrastructure and other things, power and water in Iran. But surprisingly, the oil markets, although still elevated from the 6 weeks of the war, are not really telling us that this is any other strange day in this 6 weeks, any different than yesterday or the day. It's just another day. Brent is up 1 or 2%, but nothing dramatic. What's your read of the situation? Does the Brent price tell us whether there's a crisis or not? Do we expect this to be a big day or not? Your thoughts?
Well, we already have seen in news about 1 hour ago that President Trump basically is thinking about extending the deadline. So probably the market is reacting to that. But generally speaking, we have to remember something. I know people are saying, well, why we don't have oil at 200 and 250, etc. We have to remember where we moved from to where we are right now. We moved from literally the story of the IEA telling us that we are going to have the largest surplus in history in 2026. So let's remember where we were before we talk about oil prices rising. The other issue is we have to remember that with higher prices, we have a reaction. And here I would like to mention a story, a personal story, because it is related. And I used to tell it to my students. When I moved to Colorado years ago to teach at Colorado School of Mines, I was looking for another car, and I was looking for kind of like a Jeep style kind of a car. And I saw an ad in the newspaper, and I called, and a lady answered the phone, and I was asking her about the car, and I did ask her whether the car has an AC, an air conditioning.
Yeah.
And again, remember, we are in Colorado. And her immediate answer said, no, but it has windows. Okay. This stuck in my head, and I used to tell my students about it because whenever we talk about substitutes, our mind kind of stuck like, okay, cars cannot go without gasoline, and therefore gasoline is mandatory, and I need gasoline. No, you can walk. You can literally use the bus. You can carpool. You can work from home. So the substitutes are, so we don't want to focus only on gasoline and say, well, I don't have a substitute, and therefore the elasticity of gasoline is very low. And this has become nonsense. So this idea about AC and windows stuck in my head because of that reason. We have to look at the larger picture. So as oil prices increase, we do have reaction from people. We do have reaction from companies. We do have reaction from airlines, for example, buses, etc. We have all kind of reactions, and we see this. So what we are going to end up with higher oil prices, that are we going to have the very, very high prices? No. And the reason why, because we end up with two things here. We end up with something called demand decline, and we end up with demand destruction. These are completely two different things. Destruction, that's it. It's gone. We cannot recover it. For decline, we can recover it later under completely different circumstances. So we have all those forces basically are working. At the
And do
same
we
time,
have two things as well from the point of view? I hear you talk there, Colorado, turn your window down, and so on. But that we have two worlds, and that we have Brent and WTI. I mean, Brent as a futures contract delivery in 2 or 3 months' time is telling us one thing. Dated Brent is telling us that prices of oil are already 30, $40 above the futures price. If you want a cargo of oil today or next week, you're going to pay 50, Brent plus $50. The world is having a very different experience so far, 6 weeks into this war, from an oil and energy shortage and energy stress than America. America is barely noticing, except for they've got to pay a little bit more to fill up their tank. But ultimately, this is not a stress moment yet for the US, but it is for much of Asia, increasingly for Europe. Your thoughts of this being two different experiences?
yes, of course, we have the spot market that is completely different from the futures, and we've seen it with prices of DME Oman basically going above 170, while US prices were around $90. But we have to remember something. This is a historic event. This is an event, probably the largest event we ever seen in our lifetime. This is unlike any other thing we've seen before. And when we have an event like this, we end up with panic. And when we talk about panic, we end up with results that are completely different from what we are used to. I'm going to give you several examples of how this panic is going to create this price differential. The first impact is in the spot market, we will see ship rerouting. The ship itself and the shipment basically is going to be sold probably several times. And we've seen this in history so many times, especially like even in 1973, 1974, we've seen it at that time. So shipments basically will change ownership and they will change direction. We end up with a situation where we end up with more oil on water than otherwise. So that kind of exacerbate the situation because the oil is not being delivered. And we end up with more oil on water. The other one
Sorry,
that we
why is it
end up
not being
with,
delivered?
because let's say a shipment going from the United States to Europe, it is near Morocco, and now it will change and go back to let's say India. So on its way to India, it has to go around Africa, and that's longer distance than arriving in Europe. And by the time it arrives, let's say near Tanzania, it will be sold to Japan. And then instead of going
Ah,
to India, it's going to go to Japan. That's longer distance. So we end up with more oil on water not being delivered, and that exacerbates the shortage.
right.
And then we have hoarding. When we talk about hoarding, this is a big, big problem that we see today, again, because of the panic. We have traders basically hoarding oil because I'm talking about physical oil, because they think, well, prices are going to be higher tomorrow. I can make more money. So the oil is not
Although
being
the
in the
future
market.
price shows us is much lower than today.
Correct. But in the physical market, basically, if you just wait another week or
Right.
you buy it when President Trump make a statement and then you wait another 24 hours. So that type of hoarding. And then we have the energy intensive industries, whether you talk about the petrochemicals, you talk about refineries, you talk about airlines, they want to make sure that they stay in business. So they are going to hoard the amount of oil they have or petroleum products, and then they're going to buy more and hoard for fear that their business is going to stop. So that exacerbates the situation. And then we have another type of hoarding by countries, where we have like almost 40 countries right now are prohibiting the exports of petroleum products. And what people do not realize is big part of the problem that we see in petroleum product shortages right now are not happening because of Hormuz, are happening because of countries banning the exports of petroleum products.
China
For
banned the
example,
export of diesel and gasoline.
correct. So some countries, if you look at Australia, for example, got affected on the spot, not because of Hormuz, because China is not exporting. So that, in fact, if you look at jet fuel in particular, half of the shortage in half of the decline in jet fuel supply is the result of countries prohibiting the exports.
When
So
we
that's part of
look
it.
when we look to America, I mean, as the world is looking at the moment, particularly today and yesterday, and in this kind of deadline moment that Trump has announced for Iran to conform to what he expects, the question we have from this far away is, are there any restraints on Trump? It looks like typically in the past, even Republican Senates have been restraints on Republican presidents. The Congress, there doesn't seem to be any obvious restraints on Trump. The midterm elections, people say, but even there, they're pretty much lost to most incumbent presidents. They lose the midterm elections. So fighting aggressively or thinking that they would be a restraint. Are there any restraints on Trump? Where could that come from? Or where should, from us far away, not understanding or being aware of the minutiae of American day-to-day politics and reality, do they exist? Are there any restraints? Where are they?
Well, let's go deeper into this. Let's look at the situation in general and ask the following questions. The first question is this war about Iran and its nuclear program, or it is about something larger? So it is part of the re-engineering of the world economy and the world financial system. So if it is about Iran and its nuclear program, then we know exactly what the objective is and we know the results of it. But if you put it within the larger picture and say, well, hold on just a second, this is part of the trade wars, the sanctions, the tariffs, Venezuela, Panama Canal, the Red Sea, China, Russia, Greenland. You put it within that picture here, you end up with a completely different outcome because in this case, if you want to go this route, it is about the control of all the choke points around the world. And that's a completely different outcome, completely different
Which do you think it is?
results. Well, I got, in a sense, pushbacks, whatever I said. Okay. But all I'm going to do basically is just present all sides and present
Because
all the
quite
evidence on
often
both sides.
Trump gets dismissed for being such a strategic thinker. Are you indicating that we should consider Trump, as the saying goes, playing 4G chess, like that big strategy stuff? Because most
No,
of the
not really.
analysis is that this is sort of
If
instinct
you
and
take
ad
the
hoc
second
and
if you take the second point of view, here we have to go back to what happened in November. And in November, where the Trump administration released the national security strategy.
yes, he did.
The
Yeah.
national security strategy does not come from an administration. Usually it comes from what we call the deep state. And the whoever is in the White House basically is the one who is going to execute the plan. So we have to differentiate between those who made the plan, which is a long-term plan over decades, and between those who are executing it. And the execution could go really bad. And therefore, the deep state get angry, and then they don't care about the elections. The president care about the election. The people around him care about the election. The deep state basically does not care about the election. They want someone good to execute. So if you look at it that way, we get a completely different picture because people keep saying, well, what about the elections? Well, the deep state does not care about elections. And that's where the issue is. Do we have bad execution? Well, we will leave that to the experts to tell us about whether it's bad or not. But the issue here that we are looking at, and that brings us to the second question is, so the first question is this about Iran and nuclear, or it's about the whole world? And who closed the Hormuz Strait?
Lloyd's
Here you
Insurance.
have, well, here you have, again, it's either Iran or the United States. Just for the last 24 hours, I'm hearing some other stuff basically saying, look, Iran is just the proxy, and it is really China who closed it. I mean, you can find enough circumstantial evidence. At the same time, you can find some holes in those arguments. But whatever happened, there are very thing the clear. Or let me rephrase that. Almost everything we are hearing in the media is either false or tilted and kind of redirected. So we have to be careful with that. At the same time, most of the political statements that we hear from politicians are political statements, either for domestic consumption or for whatever reason is. So we cannot rely on any of that. And therefore, we are almost lost in
Could
these things.
both be
So let's,
true? Could both be true in the sense that this war is about the nuclear file for Israel and the potential, however remote at this point, given that apparently Israel and America bombed everything out of existence. But ultimately, the Israelis are obsessed with this, however remote the nuclear threat is. If it's even 0.1%, they can't sleep at night. And then the second corridor, i.e., the bigger strategic China control the world's oil choke points, that could be an American agenda, and that both of these things could coexist, and which is fine for a while. But as you try to exit, which we're trying to do at the moment, it would appear that the fact that there are two agendas makes the exit very, very difficult.
that's absolutely a kind of a possibility. And here is the reason why. If you look at, I mean, we studied this in school, if you recall, in high school, when you look at forest and how basically certain plants live off other plants, and the other plants basically, as long as all of them are alive, they are all fine. But one of the main one dies, the other one will die. So that might apply in this case too. But the issue that we need to focus on here is, okay, for us, what do we know for sure? Aside from what the media is telling us, aside from what politicians are telling us, what we know for sure is this, that there were three wars, there was a revolution, there were attacks on ships over the years. Throughout all those periods, we have never seen the insurance companies making a decision like they did this time. So that's the first fact, regardless. The second fact is, who is the main beneficiary of all of this? The main beneficiary basically is the United States, in any way you look at it. And I can go through the list if you like to.
Give us
And
three.
yes, Putin basically benefits, Brazil benefits, Australia benefits, Guyana benefits from it, but these are limited benefits relative to the United States. The United States basically benefit in the short run, medium run, and the long term. Yes, there are costs involved. There is a lot of pain related to higher prices of fuel and other things. There could be a recession, but all of those are short term.
How does the U.S.
While
benefit? And give us some examples of that short, medium term.
let's go to what President Trump, since he came in. Again, it's not necessarily that the Trump administration is doing this. They are just executing what the deep state wants. So
I
if
mean,
you look
Trump
at
said a
what he's
lot
done,
yesterday about, I wanted to take the oil. I want to take the oil. He said it about 5 times yesterday.
well, he'd been saying this for like 35 years, even when he was
Right.
just a citizen. But if you look at what the Trump and his administration been doing from day one, AI was a big thing for them. And he had those meetings and massive amount of spending, and he was talking to other countries about investing in AI. It's everything about AI, and it is very clear if you look at the national security strategy that the pillars of it are energy and AI. And you cannot have AI without energy because AI depends on energy, and therefore it boils down to energy. And what they were saying is we need cheap energy for us, cheap, abundant energy for us, and for others, we want them to have expensive energy. And you can do that in various ways. One of them basically is controlling the choke points around the world. But if you go back and look at their AI, what they were saying all along is that we want to bring back this industry to the United States. We don't want it to be in Taiwan. We don't want it to be in China. We don't want it to be in South Korea. And this industry basically being attacked big time right now because you cannot make semiconductors, you cannot make computer chips without helium. And the dependence of those countries on helium from Qatar is extremely high. Some of them have inventories for about 6 months. Those are the largest companies. Others have inventories for about a month, and that month is almost over. From where they are going to get the helium. It just happened that the largest producer of helium in the world is the United States. So that's number one. Number two, you want to talk about fertilizer. We know that Asia depends heavily on fertilizer. And if you
Africa
look
as
at
well.
Trump, and if you look at Trump, what he was trying to tell India and other countries, buy my agricultural products. Buy more agricultural products from the United States. And they said no because of GMO and because of other things, etc. Now they got stuck. Fertilizers. If you look at a country like India, 24% of its imports come through the Hormuz Strait of fertilizers. But this is not the biggest problem for India. The biggest problem for India is that it has a large number of fertilizer plants. So they can manufacture that within India. But for them to manufacture it, they need the gas and they need the NGLs from the Gulf. So they got stuck in both ways. And the rest of the countries basically are the same problem. Well, who is, of course, you look at the largest fertilizer producers in the world, you know what it is. You want to talk about methanol. Methanol basically goes into various industries and goes into various things. And one of the ironies about methanol, probably the audience would be interested in this, that there is a competition. Even Trump is against renewables and everything else, okay? But the biofuel industry is really going through the roof in the United States. So biofuel is something big in the United States, especially when you talk about ethanol and the farmers who are mostly Republicans. But we talk about biodiesel and other things, etc. Well, who are the competitors? The competitors basically are mostly Indonesia and Malaysia. And they are some of the largest exporters in the world of biodiesel. Well, now they got stuck because while it looks on the surface that this is a great opportunity for the substitutes of oil, mineral oil, coming out of the Gulf, which is biodiesel, for example, or any biofuel, well, you cannot make biofuel without methanol that comes from the Gulf.
Well, if you follow that through, which is a very critical point to indicate America is the winner, America is operating in its own self-interest, because one of the things we're trying to judge here at this moment of the Gulf is how much we should or should not depend on America as a security protection or as a partner. But a lot of what you're sounding there is indicating that America is more a competitor. How do you see the Gulf states emerging from this crisis, both as an energy producer, as a bloc? Where do you think the winning losing is for the Gulf states at this time?
There are
In the
two issues
assumption
here I
that
would
this
like to.
crisis ends in the coming weeks.
There are two issues I would like to mention here that are not being discussed widely out there. The first one is we heard a lot of people talking about the alternatives to Hormuz Strait. And people are saying, well, let's
Like
build
the
more
East-West
pipelines.
pipeline, you mean, like Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, I mean, people are talking about more pipelines, additional
More,
pipelines. And
right.
we've seen people, even big accounts on Twitter, drawing those straight lines through Oman and through Yemen and through Syria and all that stuff, etc. And it's all nonsense. And here's why. Because this idea of pipelines came in the 80s after or during the Iraq-Iran war. That's where it came out. And the idea was, if you ask any energy expert at that time, they will tell you this is the greatest idea you can have. and was true for we taught at universities, basically, we've been telling our students about the importance of having those pipelines. But for the last 15 years, technology improved so much, and the cost of those technologies dropped so much. All it takes a couple of guys with $500 worth of equipment to destroy anything anywhere. So with drone technology and everything else, yes, you have buried by pipelines, but all the pumping stations are above ground. Okay, so with the development of technology, the one we have, and now you have bombs basically can go through a building with a 12-story building, can go all the way to the basement. Okay, so the idea of more pipelines for security reasons does not make any sense. The point here is you want to build pipelines, build them on the economics and the financial visibility of those pipelines, not on security. And that now will lead us to a completely different discussion, because which country will do that? If you look at it, basically the best candidate is Iraq, based on finance and economics alone. But you want to build it on security, it's a mute. It's just not a good argument right now. The second point is this. One of the main issues we are going to see right now is, yes, we have a plan. It is very clear that if we want to take the other answer that I mentioned, where you have the deep state and the big plan and the benefits to the United States, etc., and you take that and you follow it, you have to remember that you do have unintended consequences. Remember that the plan is written by a human. And a human basically can have errors, and they cannot see the forward and see the unintended consequences. We as experts, basically, we think of some, and then we learn about others as they come out. So one of the unintended consequences of this, especially if you put all this together, the attitude of Trump on one side and the plan on the other, put them all together, you look at the trade wars, you look at the sanctions, again, just remember the attitude, the pushy attitude that comes with it. The threat of Trump just a couple of days ago to the EU, if you don't sign a contract with me, I'm going to cut off LNG, which means that LNG was weaponized. So now we have weaponization of the choke points, and we have weaponization of LNG. And we talk about weaponization of choke points, let's remember one thing that people forget. Since the start of the Gaza war, for 2 years in a row, Russia was able to send its oil, the Urals crude, through the Red Sea, through Bab el-Mandeb, for 2 years in a row without any problems. None. But they couldn't send a single LNG tanker or LNG carrier throughout those 2 years. Well, if they don't have a problem with the Houthis and they have their own insurance, why they couldn't send LNG?
Through
that
the
means,
Red Sea, through the Suez
correct.
Canal.
So the idea here is the choke points already being weaponized, being weaponized. And now we are seeing just the larger picture of this weaponization. And LNG was weaponized by, we heard Trump basically talking about threatening the EU with that weapon. So what is the result of this? The result of this is the unintended consequence of Trump actions and his execution of the plan, that he is globalizing the Chinese model without them realizing that. And what is the Chinese model here? For the last 3 years, we've seen China basically going inward. They are literally tying the domestic energy sources, tying energy sources in general to national security. That was not the case before. And we've seen them acting on it, whether the push to increase oil and gas production regardless of cost, pushing storage to the limits, to the highest possible in everything, and depending on pipelines from Russia because they are out of the control of the seas where the US Navy is and out of the financial system that is controlled by the United States. So that's really the Chinese model. And now we are seeing Europe going that way. We are seeing Canada going that way. And now after the weaponization of Hormuz, we are going to see more countries in Asia and Africa and South America and everywhere else in the Middle East basically going exactly the same way. I'm
Let's
going back
just
to your
wrap up.
question because you asked me.
Yep.
I
Go
just
ahead,
want to
finish
say
it.
this because
Yeah.
you asked me about how those countries in the Middle East are going to react.
Yes,
And I'm going
yes,
to tie all of this together.
yes,
The
please.
idea here is those countries are going to go inwards, and all of a sudden we are going to see a new push for climate change policies, but no one is going to mention climate change. It's going to be now the banner is going to be national security. It will be exactly the same policies, but now on steroid. So they are going to go for solar, wind, EVs, storage batteries, etc., but under national security because these are domestic sources and they're always going to invoke the national security. You cannot
So
use
that's going to
any
be globally,
economic
you're
argument.
saying, not the
Yes,
Gulf, but globally. Yeah.
yes. And therefore, we are going to see a strong negative impact on the demand for oil, but in particular, and some impact on natural gas.
Let's just wrap up and ask our half hour together, looking forward to oil prices. We've seen obviously a big spike through the 6 weeks of the war to far, and the expectation, and Trump echoes it often, and I think most analysts would also echo it, is that once the war comes to an end or it starts to be significantly indicate that it's coming to an end, that oil prices will fall from the current levels, the futures contract, Brent, WTI. What's your outlook once we get the start or the end of the war or the announcement that it's going to end in a few weeks or whatever? But what's the journey for oil coming out of this conflict? Do we go back to the $60 Brent forecast for 2026? Or where do we end up, let's say, in the second half of the year?
There are two scenarios. Are we going to end up with a recession or stagflation or not? Because if this war is going to drag on, it definitely we are going to have a global recession. Now economists basically do not argue about the recession. The argument between economists is: are we going to have a recession with higher prices, which is stagflation, or are we going to have a recession? Because some of them are saying, look, the recession is going to be too steep, it's going to kill inflation. But if we are going to end up with a recession, then expect prices to decline. Whatever we might see, even OPEC Plus talking about production cuts as a result of that, because prices, of course, they don't focus on prices, but you look at the balances. And one thing that analysts are missing is that if we end up with a recession in 2026, 2027 is gone. Because we are going to build massive inventories during that recession, and that's going to be pushed to 2027. So 2027 becomes the play where it's not going to be as bullish as we were expecting before. And if we are not going to end up with a recession and everything goes the way it is right now, then we are going to end up with higher prices than before the war. So to give you an example, our
Prices will
forecast and
decline, but not decline to where they were.
correct. So if you go back and to our previous show last time we talked, we were expecting prices to be in the 60s throughout 2026. And now, if we don't have a recession, prices, of course, the end of the war does not mean the end of the crisis. The crisis
No.
will take 2 or 3 months, probably more, to end. But once everything is said and done, oil prices will decline, but they are not going to decline to the 60s. They are going to decline probably to the 70s or low 80s in this case. But if we are going to end up with a recession, we are going to go back to the 40s, of course, for a short
And what
period
do you
of
think
time
will
anyway.
determine those two? Will it be the length of the conflict, how long it stretches?
The length, yes. The length of the conflict, basically, if this is going to go into May, then it is going to be a serious problem for everyone. And this is going to be a big issue. Of course, I was talking about the facts earlier, how the United States benefited, are going to benefit from this. The other fact, before we end the show, is that China is the least impacted. Why? Because China knew about it, knew in advance, and they were very well prepared. So if you go back to the previous show, we did talk about this. And we talked about how China is building the inventories and how China, if you recall the statement, China basically thought that this is from the June war, that Hormuz Strait will be closed. Again, this is written in June, this being said on your show and other shows at the same time, that China believed that Hormuz Strait will be closed, but not by Iran, by the United States. And the question now, and I'm just raising the question, is whether China basically was ahead and they did close the Hormuz Strait before the US closed it.
When you say that in a kind of conceptual sense, obviously they didn't send a navy to close it. How would they theoretically have told China or put pressure on Iran to close it? How does China close the
Well,
Strait of Hormuz?
in a sense, there are, as you know, many cases where things happen and people look at the event and say, okay, how I can take advantage of it. So the United States and the insurance companies basically played their game, and then the others basically try to take advantage of it. They say, okay, well, if you are going to go that way, I'm going to go this way. And therefore, we see all those statements and everything else. So again, this is just a question. We don't have, there are circumstantial evidence, there are rumors, etc. There are many holes in every
Yeah.
one of those theories. But there are some facts that we cannot dispute. One of them is that China was prepared.
What about the other rumor that is sort of a rumor and messaging that the Gulf states are unable to proceed forward with Iran controlling the Straits of Hormuz? Do you think they could adapt to that?
There is no way, and in fact, for me, even personally, there is no way Iran can control it, even militarily. Even today, I mean, just yes, they can cause problems
Yeah.
because we've seen 45 years. We have 45 years of evidence of three wars and attacks on ships, etc. We've seen that, and ships continue going through, even with ships being blown up next to them. So we've seen that. Look at what happened in the Red Sea, for example. The Houthis literally attacked oil tankers and sunk them, literally sunk them. We did not see the insurance companies canceling the insurance. So there is something about this that need to be
I,
looked at.
I had, and I will wrap it up here. I had just had lunch today with a client who was telling me that prior to this conflict, he's an operator, an upstream operator in the region. His insurance was X when he renewed it at the end of last year. Now, if they were to renew the same insurance for operating field operations, it would be 40 times X, 40 times X for the same insurance policy. Uh, so that is clearly a very, very, very big problem going forward. Listen, we're going to have to wrap it up there. Unbelievable, as always, to get the opportunity at this very important time to speak with Anas Alhajji,
Thank you.
managing partner of Energy Outlook. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.